Much of the life of Adolf Hitler still remains debatable or mysterious decades after the end of the Second World War, and one particular point of contention is the relationship that his mother and father had and the upbringing that the young boy had. We know that Adolf Hitler was incredibly close to his mother, and that her death left him heartbroken and bereft, as a doctor claimed that he was the saddest man I'd ever seen. But Klara Hitler was noted to have been a very pious and kind lady, who would allegedly turn in her grave if she knew what had become of her son, a man who was responsible for the deaths of millions across Europe and the world during the Second World War. But Klara and Alois Hitler, the mother and father of Adolf Hitler, were buried together inside of a plot in Leonding. However, the tombstone and grave marker was removed, and the rights to this rented burial plot were given up. Today it's not known what happened to the remains inside of the grave of Hitler's parents, but what happened with the gravestone. Join us today as we look at this, and as always, to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Alois Hitler was married twice before he met Klara Perzel, who was his relative, and she had been hired as a household servant. She was 16 at the time, and Alois and Klara were actually first cousins once removed. There was a huge age gap between the pair, roughly 23 years, but this did not detract Alois, as soon after she became a servant in the household, Klara became pregnant. But in order to marry, Alois Hitler had to submit an appeal to the Catholic Church to grant the marriage due to the closeness in relation between he and his future wife. Permission was granted for the marriage from Rome, and the pair married on the 7th of January 1885 in a small ceremony held in Alois's rented apartments on the top floor of the Pommel Inn. A few guests and witnesses attended, and a meal was served, and then Alois, following this, went back to work. Klara Hitler thought that the service was too short. However, throughout their marriage, the pair, strangely, allegedly still referred to themselves as uncle and niece. Klara Hitler did give birth to a first child, a son named Gustav, in 1885, and then in 1886 she gave birth to a daughter. Another son was born in 1887, but this child died within a few days. Diphtheria then hit the household, and both Gustav and Ida, the daughter, died. But on the 20th of April 1889, Klara Hitler gave birth to another son, and she could never have imagined what this son would later become in life. She gave birth to a son named Adolf, who was considered a sickly child, and Klara constantly worried about him. Alois Hitler, Adolf's father, was at the time 51, and he did not seem too bothered with his son, and he preferred to keep himself busy with what he liked doing at this point in his life. But Alois later wanted his son to become a civil servant, but Adolf felt indifferent about his father, and he did not want to live the life his father wanted for him, and he hated the dreams he had for him. Because of this, he wanted to be the opposite of what his father wished. It was said of the household, though, that Alois was rough with his wife, and when he was at home he hardly spoke to her. If he was in a bad mood, he took it out on the children, or his wife, and it was heard from other family members that Alois used to beat his children. Alois Hitler died on the 3rd of January 1903. He had been for a glass of wine in a nearby pub, and then he was offered a newspaper, and he collapsed while sitting on a couch. He was taken into another room, and a doctor confirmed that he had died from what was a pleural hemorrhage. Adolf Hitler was 13 when his father died, and he later wrote in Mein Kampf that he died from a stroke of apoplexy, but it was claimed that when Hitler saw his father's body that he did cry. Alois Hitler was then buried in a grave and in a plot inside of a cemetery in the Austrian town of Leonding, around 6 miles from the city of Linz. Following the death of her husband, Klara sold the family home in Leonding and moved her children to an apartment in Linz, and they lived a rather modest life. But in 1906, Klara discovered a lump in her breast and left it, but as further symptoms such as chest pain developed, she spoke to the family doctor, Eduard Bloch, about this in January 1907. She had not sought immediate medical help, and Bloch himself did not inform Klara that she had breast cancer, and instead told her son Adolf to tell her. Bloch told Adolf Hitler that his mother had a small chance of surviving if she underwent a radical mastectomy. This news devastated the household, and it was said that Klara, deeply religious, assumed that her fate was God's will, and it would never have occurred to her to complain. She did undergo the surgery, but the cancer had developed too far, She was then told that the cancer was terminal. Adolf Hitler had been in Vienna to try and study art, and he moved back to care for his mother, but by October 1907, it was found that she was rapidly going downhill. Adolf Hitler begged the doctors for a new treatment, and she was given experimental iodoform, which was said to have been an experimental form of chemotherapy. But the treatment was very painful, and it left Klara not able to swallow. However, she died on the 21st of December 1907, and was then buried with her husband Alois, Hitler's father, inside of the plot in Leonding, near to Linz. Dr. Bloch later said about Hitler and his mother's relationship that, while Hitler was not a mother's boy in the usual sense, I never witnessed a closer attachment. Their love had been mutual. Klara Hitler adored her son. She allowed him his own way whenever possible. For example, she admired his watercolour paintings and drawings, and supported his artistic ambitions, in opposition to his father, at what cost to herself, one may guess. However, in 2012, the tombstone and grave marker which outlined the site of Alois and Klara's grave was removed suddenly, without ceremony, and this was then reported all around the world. It's believed that the cemetery, specifically the town cemetery in Leonding, had been visited thousands of times over the years by neo-Nazis and others to pay their respects to the man and woman who gave birth to a man who would later become the Dictator of Nazi Germany. Every 10 years the lease for the grave had to be renewed, and it was said that a descendant of the family had informed the local authorities that she decided not to renew the lease. She had given up her rights to the rented plot, and no details were published as to who specifically this descendant was, and it was just known that she was an elderly woman who had grown tired of the upkeep. The local priest claimed a descendant of Hitler's father, reportedly an unidentified elderly woman living in Lower Austria, has relinquished her rights and has had it, meaning the gravestone, removed. The upkeep of the grave was becoming increasingly difficult as the years went by, and the grave kept being misused for gatherings of sympathisers, he said. But the pastor said the remains of Hitler's customs official father, Alois, who died in 1903, and his mother Klara, who passed away 4 years later, had not yet been exhumed. What this ultimately left was the remains of Adolf Hitler's mother and father, interred inside of a grave of which no one owned the land, meaning they could have been exhumed and buried elsewhere, or had their remains cremated or disposed of. It was not known specifically what happened to the remains and whether they still lay inside the grave today, but the lease expiring also meant that a new burial could be interred in the grave of the Hitlers. One of the most prominent things that occurred to the grave was the removal of the gravestone. This was a stone monument which had a black oval shape on it, and in gold lettering it outlined the names of the Hitlers and the dates they died, along with images of them. This tombstone, which had attracted many people to visit, was actually destroyed and taken down by a stonemason, carrying out his work very quietly. Later it was claimed that the remains had not been exhumed, but what was left of the grave was a white stone square and a tree. During Hitler's time in power, he had the grave of his mother and father also decorated with flags and banners containing the swastika, and huge amounts of flowers were laid at the grave. Over the years, neo-Nazi groups also laid other items at it, including a vase containing the SS runic symbol on, and the words unforgettable on it, and it was also said that a lot of flowers and wreaths were deposited there from people who were clearly admirers. It had to do with the son and not the parents. There are different reports as to whether the bodies of Klara Hitler and Alois Hitler have been removed, and this seemingly has not been cleared up by the local authorities. One report claims that their bodies may have been removed, and that the grave was now free to house another body of someone else. It would be assumed that if the grave space was rented and the lease not renewed, that the body would have been exhumed and maybe placed elsewhere. Today this is only marked by a grass space next to other graves. But are the bodies still in the ground? For the locals of Leonding, the removal of Hitler's grave marker was something that ended a significant amount of neo-Nazi tourism, and they had grown incredibly tired of this. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.